Subscribe to Incredible Detective Stories and enjoy watching. The snow at Blackwood Halt doesn't fall, it conspires. It swirls around the timber beams of the station platform like white dust settling in a tomb. I have been the station master here for 12 years. Before that, I was a signalman on the main line, until a night I don't talk about. A night of screeching metal and silence that followed. Now, I prefer the silence. Blackwood Halt is the end of the line for most sane people. It sits 40 miles north of the nearest township, nestled in a valley where the pines grow so thick they blot out the moon. We service the timber freighters and the occasional scenic charter that takes tourists up to the Shadow Ridge Pass. But mostly, it's just me, the coffee pot, and the radio chatter from the dispatch center in Oak Haven. My name is Elias. I am 58 years old. I have a bad hip that aches when the pressure drops, and tonight, the pressure was bottoming out. A blizzard was hammering the glass of the control booth. The wind sounded like a wounded animal trying to claw its way inside. It was 2:14 a.m. on a Tuesday. The schedule was blank. The last freight had cleared the switch at midnight. I was settling in for the long, dark stretch until dawn, reading a paperback with a broken spine. Then, the sensor on the trackpad tripped. A red light blinked on my console. Track 1. Approach. I sat up, the pain in my hip flaring. I tapped the glass of the gauge. It had to be a glitch. The sensors out here are old. A deer crossing the ties or a heavy branch falling under the weight of the snow could trigger them. I grabbed the radio mic. Oak Haven Dispatch, this is Blackwood. I have a sensor trip on the north approach. Are you pushing anything my way? The static hissed back at me. The storm was chewing up the signal. I waited. Nothing. I stood up and walked to the window. I cupped my hands against the cold glass and peered out into the white maelstrom. At first, there was only the swirling snow. Then, I saw it. A single, piercing eye cutting through the dark. The headlight of a locomotive. It wasn't a freight train. The engine was sleek, streamlined, silver and blue. It was the Aurora, a luxury charter that ran the mountain route during ski season. But the Aurora wasn't due until Friday. And it certainly wasn't scheduled for a 200 a.m. run in a blizzard that had grounded the rescue choppers. I grabbed my heavy coat and the lantern. I didn't grab a weapon. In 12 years, the only thing I've had to fight off was a rabid raccoon. I stepped out onto the platform. The cold hit me like a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs. The rumble of the train grew louder, a deep, bass thrum that vibrated in the soles of my boots. The train was moving slowly. Too slowly. It wasn't braking for the station, it was coasting, losing momentum against the friction of the snow-packed rails. It slid into the station light, a ghost of steel and glass. I watched the cab pass me. I couldn't see the driver. The glare on the windshield was too intense. The wheels screamed as the automatic station brakes. The magnets on the track engaged the emergency stop. The train shuddered and died. The engine hum dropped to a low idle. Silence returned, heavier than before. I walked down the length of the platform, the snow crunching loudly under my boots. The train consisted of an engine and 4 cars. First class, dining sleeper, and a tail observation car. The windows were dark, save for the emergency low lights. I reached the door of the first passenger car. I expected a conductor to step out, angry about the emergency stop, yelling about schedules and signals. I expected confused passengers wiping condensation from the glass. The door remained closed. I knocked. The sound was dull, swallowed by the wind. Hello, this is the station master. You need to open up. Nothing. I tried the emergency release panel on the outside of the door. It wasn't locked. The pneumatic seal hissed, a sound like a dying breath, and the door slid open. Warm air rushed out to meet me. It smelled of expensive perfume, roasted coffee, and old leather. It was the smell of wealth. Hello, I called out, stepping into the vestibule. Is anyone there? My voice echoed down the corridor. No answer. I shook the snow from my coat and stepped into the first carriage. It was a lounge car. Plush velvet armchairs, mahogany tables, brass fixtures. It was empty. But not just empty. It was interrupted. On the first table to my left, A game of poker was in progress. The cards were face down. A tumbler of whiskey sat on a coaster, the ice melted but the liquid still there. A cigar rested in an ashtray, burned down to a long, fragile finger of ash that hadn't yet broken. I moved deeper into the car. A woman's scarf was draped over the back of a chair. A book lay open on a seat face down, as if the reader had just stepped away to use the restroom. I walked the entire length of the car. 20 seats. Signs of recent occupation in almost all of them, but not a single soul. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I've seen crashes. I've seen death. But I have never seen a vacuum. A crash has noise, chaos, bodies. This was worse. This was a suspension of reality. I moved to the next car. The dining car. The tables were set for dinner. Plates of food half eaten sat cold on the white linens. A fork resting on the edge of a plate. A napkin crumpled on the floor. A bottle of wine uncorked, breathing on a sideboard. I touched a silver coffee pot on a serving station. It was lukewarm. "Is anybody here?" I shouted, my voice cracking slightly. "This is the police!" I wasn't the police. I was a man with a bad hip and a lantern, standing in a graveyard of unfinished meals. I checked the restrooms. Empty. I checked the sleeper car. The doors were open. Beds turned down. Luggage stowed in the racks. I opened a suitcase at random. Men's suits, silk ties, a shaving kit. The owners hadn't left. They hadn't packed. They had simply ceased to be. I reached the final car, the observation deck. It was empty. Just the snow swirling against the rear window. Looking back at the track that disappeared into the black forest, I was alone on a train that had been full of life less than an hour ago. Panic is a cold thing. It starts in the stomach and works its way up. I forced it down. I needed logic. People don't vanish. Physics doesn't allow it. I turned back and ran toward the engine. If the passengers were gone, the crew had to know why. The driver, the engineer. I sprinted through the ghost train, ignoring the expensive stillness. I reached the front. The door to the engine cab was heavy, reinforced steel. It was locked. I pounded on it. "Open the door! Now!" Silence. I used my master key, a heavy skeleton key that works on most rolling stock locks. I jammed it in and turned. The tumbler clicked. I pushed the door open and stumbled into the cab. The instrument panel was lit up like a Christmas tree. Gauges flickered. The heater was blasting. The engineer's chair was empty. I looked at the floor. No body, no blood, no sign of a struggle. But then I saw it. The dead man's switch. The pedal the driver has to keep pressed to prove he's conscious. If he lifts his foot, the train brakes automatically. A heavy toolbox had been wedged onto the pedal. The train had been driving itself. I stood there, the hum of the idling engine filling my ears, and realized I was standing in a crime scene that defied explanation. A runaway train filled with ghosts, delivered to my doorstep in the middle of the worst storm of the decade. I needed to think. I sat in the engineer's chair, pushing the toolbox aside. The pedal sprang up with a clank. The air brakes hissed, locking the train firmly in place. It wasn't going anywhere now. I looked at the console. The GPS display was active. I traced the route back. The Aurora had departed Oakhaven at 12:45 a.m. That was impossible. The line was closed for the storm. Who authorized a departure? I tried the train's radio. Dead air. The antenna must have been iced over or damaged. I needed to call out. I had to get back to the station booth where the landline was hardwired. The storm might have killed the radio, but the copper wires usually held. I climbed down from the cab, my boots slipping on the icy steps. The wind had picked up. It was a whiteout. I fought my way back to the station building, the cold biting through my layers. Inside the booth, the silence was different. It was the silence of safety, or at least the illusion of it. I grabbed the black handset of the emergency phone. Dial tone. Thank God. I dialed the direct line to the regional police dispatcher. It rang 4 times. State Police Dispatcher Miller. Miller, this is Elias Vance at Blackwood Halt. I have a situation, Elias. We're dealing with a 50-car pileup on the interstate. Make it quick. Is the roof caving in? I have a Aurora. It just pulled in, northbound. The Aurora. That charter isn't running. The line is red flag, it's here, Miller. And it's empty. Empty. You mean it's a repositioning run? Crew only? No. I mean empty? No crew. No passengers. But the dinner plates are full, the coffee is warm, and the poker game is paused. The engine was rigged with a toolbox on the dead man's switch. Everyone is gone. There was a pause on the line. Elias, are you drinking? You know the rules. I haven't had a drink in 10 years, Miller. I'm telling you, I have a ghost train sitting on track 1. Send a unit. I can't send a unit. The pass is blocked. The plows won't be through until morning. You're on your own until at least 08 Theta Dow. I can't be on my own with this. There's luggage. Wallets. I need to secure the scene. Then secure it. Lock the doors. Don't touch anything. We'll get there when the weather breaks. Miller out. The line clicked dead. I stared at the receiver. On my own. Just me and the ghosts. I couldn't just sit there. I had to understand. My mind, trained by years of analyzing switch failures and signal delays, began to deconstruct the problem. A train leaves Oakhaven with people. It arrives at Blackwood Halt 40 miles later without them. Constraint. The train did not stop at any stations in between. There are no stations. Just forest, cliffs and tunnels. Variable the time. I looked at the log I had started in my head. Departure 12:45, arrival 2:14. That's an hour and 29 minutes. The distance is 40 miles. Average speed for the Elias Aurora on this winding track is usually 50 miles per hour. It should have taken 48 minutes. The train was late. Over 40 minutes late. Where was it for those 40 minutes? I grabbed a flashlight, a heavy iron pry bar from the tool wall, for courage more than utility, and a notebook. I was going back out. I boarded the train again. This time, I wasn't looking for people. I was looking for the story. I started in the last car, the observation deck. I walked forward, scanning the floor. The carpet was thick, navy blue with gold stars. In the sleeper car corridor, I found the first anomaly. On the floor, near the vestibule door, there was a faint smear. It was dried brownish. Mud. No, I knelt down and shone the light close. It was clay. Red clay. The soil around Blackwood is black loam and granite dust. The soil at Oakhaven is sandy. Red clay is found in only one place on this line. The Devil's Gulch. The gulch is a canyon about 20 miles south of here. There's an old maintenance siding there, abandoned in the 70s. The track runs through a long tunnel, then crosses a high trestle bridge. If the train stopped at the gulch, it would explain the clay. But why stop there? There's nothing there but rotting timber and a sheer drop into the river. I moved to the dining car. I looked closer at the tables. Table 4, a wine glass had tipped over. The stain on the tablecloth was dry. Table 2, a plate of steak. A knife was on the floor. I looked at the windows. They were sealed, double-paned heavy glass. Impossible to open. The doors between carriages were automatic. I went to the vestibule between the dining car and the lounge. I looked at the rubber matting on the floor. It was wet. But not just with snow. There were puddles. I dipped my finger in one and smelled it. Chlorine. Disinfectant. No. It smelled like the industrial cleaner they use in cattle trucks. I stood up, my knees cracking. Someone had boarded this train with dirty boots. Boots covered in red clay and something else. They had walked through the cars. I went back to the lounge car. I looked at the poker game again. I noticed something I had missed the first time. The players hadn't just stood up. The chair at the head of the table was knocked over backward. It was lying on the floor. And under the table, near the heating vent, was a small object. I reached under and retrieved it. It was a cufflink. Gold, engraved with initials. JD, if I knew those initials. Julian Drake. He was a state senator, a powerful man. I had seen his picture in the papers just yesterday. He was supposed to be at a fundraising gala in the capital. So, this was a VIP charter. Senators, wealthy donors, high-value targets. But where were they? If they had been taken by force, there would be more signs of struggle. Bullet holes, blood, smashed glass. This was too clean. It was as if they had been interrupted, heralded into a group, and marched off. But you can't march 40 people off a train in the middle of a blizzard without a convoy of vehicles. and the Devil's Gulch has no road access, unless... My mind flashed back to the geography of the line. The tunnel. The Devil's Gulch tunnel is 2 miles long. It cuts through the mountain. Inside the tunnel, you are sheltered from the storm. Inside the tunnel, there is an old service access shaft that leads up to the logging roads. That was it. They stopped the train in the tunnel. But who drove it here? The engineer was gone. The toolbox was on the pedal. Someone drove the train to the tunnel, stopped it, offloaded everyone, set the toolbox, and let the train ghost its way to Blackwood. But why send it here? Why not just leave it in the tunnel? Sending it here was a message, or a distraction. I returned to the driver's cab. I needed to find the onboard data recorder. The black box of the train. It's usually located in a locked cabinet behind the driver's seat. I pried the cabinet door open with the iron bar. The metal shrieked. The slot was empty. The drive had been ripped out. Professional, calculated. I sat back, frustration boiling over. Then I looked at the windshield again. The wipers were off. The glass was caked with ice. But on the side window, the one that opens manually, there was a handprint. A greasy smudge on the inside of the glass. I shone my light on it. It was small. A woman's hand. Or a small man's. I looked down at the control panel. There was a clipboard tucked between the seat and the wall. I pulled it out. It was the manifest. Passenger count 12's crew 4, 12 passengers, not 40. 12 very important people. And then I saw the handwritten note at the bottom of the page, scrawled in shaky blue ink. It wasn't a log entry. It was a desperate scrawl. Jess. Vance. Sleep. The words chilled me faster than the storm outside. Gas. That explained the lack of struggle. They didn't fight because they couldn't. They were sedated. Someone had pumped gas into the ventilation system. I looked up at the ceiling of the cab. The vent louvers were taped over with duct tape. The driver had tried to protect himself. So the driver was alive when the gas started. He taped the vents. He tried to keep driving. Where was he? He wasn't in the cab. He wasn't in the cars. I stood up and looked out the side window. Down at the tracks, the snow was piled high. If he jumped, he'd be dead. At 50 miles an hour in this terrain, suicide. Unless he didn't jump. I looked at the door to the engine compartment. The noisy, hot room behind the cab, where the massive diesel generator lived. It was a restricted area. Ear protection required. I walked to the door. It was latched from the outside. I unlatched it and swung the heavy steel door open. The heat hit me, smelling of oil and ozone. The roar of the engine was deafening. I stepped onto the catwalk that ran alongside the massive V12 engine. There, curled up in the far corner, squeezed between the generator housing and the outer wall, was a man. He was wearing the blue uniform of the railway. He was shivering violently, his eyes wide and unseeing. He had a gas mask clutched in his hands, but he wasn't wearing it. I rushed over to him. "Can you hear me?" I shouted over the engine roar. He looked up at me. His face was pale, his lips blue. He wasn't just cold, he was in shock. "Took them," he whispered. I could barely hear him. I grabbed him by the shoulders and hauled him up. "Come on. We need to get you out of here." I dragged him back into the cab and slammed the engine door shut. The silence returned, relatively speaking. I sat him in the engineer's chair. I found a thermos of coffee in my own bag and poured him a cup. His hands shook so badly he spilled half of it. "Drink," I ordered. "Then talk." He took a sip. He looked young, maybe 30. I'm Miller, not the dispatcher. David Miller, assistant engineer. "David, where are the passengers?" "The tunnel," he stammered. "The gulch. We hit a red signal, false signal. We stopped." Then the vents, the hissing sound. Everyone in the back went quiet. And the driver, the senior engineer. David closed his eyes. He opened the door. To see what was happening, they shot him. Silencer. "Just a foot and he was down. Whew." Men in tactical gear. Masks. They came aboard. They dragged the bodies out. The passengers, I don't know if they were alive. They looked asleep. "And you?" I hid. "In the engine room. It's hot, noisy." They didn't check it. I think they assumed the crew was just the two of us in the cab. They dumped the senior engineer's body off the bridge. He took a shuddering breath. Then one of them, the leader, he came into the cab. I watched through the crack in the door. He set the toolbox. He set the computer to bypass. He said, David looked at me, terror in his eyes. He said, send it to Blackwood. Let the old man deal with the wreck. My blood ran cold. The old man, I asked. Yes, he knew the station. He knew you. He said, Vance is on duty. He'll freeze. He always freezes. He always freezes. The words hung in the air, sharper than the ice on the windows. It wasn't just a random crime. It was personal. Someone knew my history. Someone knew about the crash 15 years ago, where I hesitated for 10 seconds on a switch change and 20 people died. I was cleared of negligence. Equipment failure was the official ruling, but the railway grapevine has a long memory. They knew I froze. Who was he? I grabbed David by the collar of his jacket. The voice. Did you recognize it? David shook his head. No. But he walked with a limp. Left leg. Clicked when he stepped. I let go of him. The world tilted slightly. A limp. A click. Frank Iron. Russo. Russo was my old supervisor. He was the one who testified for me at the hearing. He was the one who got me this job at Blackwood, hidden away from the world. He retired 5 years ago with a golden handshake and a shattered knee from a yard accident. Why? Why would Russo hijack a senator's train? Money. It's always money, or leverage. 12 high-value hostages. The ransom would be astronomical, and using my sector, my shift, my failure as the cover, it was brilliant. If the train crashed past Blackwood, or if I failed to stop it and it derailed, the investigation would focus on the incompetence of the broken station master, giving Russo time to disappear. But the train didn't crash. The snow stopped it. And I didn't freeze. Not this time. David, I said, my voice steady, we have a problem. They think this train is going to derail in the ravine 3 miles north of here. That's where the track curves sharp. If they set the throttle to coast, it would have hit that curve at 60. The snow slowed it down. They'll be watching, David whispered. If they have scanners, they'll know the train stopped. Exactly. Which means they know their plan failed. And they know there's a loose end. Me. Use. I looked out the window. The storm was our enemy, but it was also our shield. Visibility was 0. If Russo had a team coming to finish the job, they'd have to come up the access road. That road is treacherous in July. In a blizzard, it's a death trap. But Russo knew the rails. He wouldn't come by road, he'd come by rail vehicle, a track inspector's truck, or a high rail pickup. I checked the 100 AM. Can you operate the engine? I asked David. I think so, but the airlines are frozen. We need to build pressure. Do it. Get the pressure up. Keep the brakes locked. What are you going to do? I'm going to switch the track. Blackwood Halt has a siding, a dead-end spur that runs into an old collapsing shed we used to store lumber in. If I could switch the points, and if Russo came up the line expecting a clear path to the train, I could divert him. Or better yet, I could hide the train. No, I corrected myself. I'm not switching the track. I'm moving the train. David looked at me like I was insane. Into the shed. It won't fit. Not the shed. The dark spot. About half a mile south. Back the way the train came, there's a dense overhang of rock and pine. A natural blind spot. If we backed the train there and cut the lights, it would be invisible to anyone coming up from the south until they were right on top of it. We'll need to ambush them, David. Because if we stay here, we're sitting ducks in a lit station. I grabbed the iron bar. I'm gonna manually clear the switch. You build pressure. When I signal with the lantern, 3 flashes, you reverse. Slowly. No lights. I stepped back out into the hellscape of the storm. My hips screamed in protest as I trudged down the track to the manual switch lever. The snow was knee-deep. I had to kick and dig to clear the mechanism. The grease was frozen thick. I hauled on the lever. It wouldn't budge. He always freezes. Not tonight, Frank. I gritted out. I jammed the iron bar into the mechanism for leverage. I put my entire weight into it. The metal groaned. I pushed until spots danced in my vision. Clunk. The points shifted. I turned back to the train. I raised the lantern. 1, 2, 3. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a puff of black smoke belched from the Aurora's exhaust. The wheels slipped, sparking against the ice, then caught. The ghost train began to move backward, retreating into the darkness. I jumped onto the rear step of the engine as it passed. We rolled back into the shadow of the overhang. David cut the engine. The silence returned, but this time it was a predatory silence. We waited. 10 minutes. 20. Then we heard it, the high-pitched whine of a high-rail truck engine. A single set of headlights cut through the snow, coming from the south. It was a maintenance truck, fitted with rail wheels. It slowed down as it approached the station. It stopped right where the Sea Aurora had been sitting. 2 men got out. They were wearing winter camouflage and carrying rifles. One of them limped. Russo. I watched from the darkness, 50 yards away. They were looking at the tracks. They were confused. They saw the fresh markings where the train had stopped, but no train. Russo raised a radio to his lips. He was arguing with someone. I looked at David. He was terrified, huddled on the floor of the cab. "Stay here," I whispered. "Where are you going?" "I have the advantage," I said. "This is my station." I slipped off the train and moved into the tree line. The snow muffled my steps. I knew every root and rock in these woods. I circled around the station building. Russo and his partner were standing on the platform now, peering into the station windows. "It's not here," I heard the second man say. "Did it roll through?" "No." Russo's voice was gravel and ice. "The sensors would have tripped the exit block. It's here somewhere." "Vance is playing games." Vance couldn't find his ass with both hands. Don't underestimate a man with nothing to lose. Russo kicked the door of the station booth open. They went inside. This was my chance. I ran to their truck. It was idling on the tracks. I reached inside the cab. There was a satchel on the seat. I grabbed it. It was heavy. I also grabbed the keys from the ignition and threw them as far as I could into the deep snow of the forest. I retreated back to the shadows. "Hey!" The second man had come out. He saw me. A crack echoed, a gunshot. A bullet whizzed past my ear and thudded into a pine tree. I dropped to the ground behind a stack of old railway ties. "Vance!" Russo yelled. "Come out." "Elias! Don't make this messy. We just want the tape." "The tape." I looked at the satchel I had stolen. I unzipped it. Inside were hard drives. The Aurora's surveillance drives. No, these were labeled Senator Drake Personal. This wasn't just a kidnapping. It was a data haste, blackmail material. "I know it's you, Frank!" I shouted back. "I know about the passengers! I have the assistant engineer!" "The kid?" Russo laughed. "The kid doesn't know anything. Give me the bag, Elias. You can walk away. You're good at walking away from disasters, aren't you?" The insult landed, but it didn't sting. Not anymore. "I called the state police, Frank!" "They know." "You called Miller." "Miller's a lazy sot. He won't send anyone until the storm breaks. By then, we'll be gone. And you'll be a tragic victim of a robbery gone wrong." He was flanking me. I could hear the crunch of snow to my left. I needed a weapon. I had the pry bar. It wasn't enough against rifles, but I had the station. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small remote. It was the control for the yard lights, the high-intensity floodlights we used for loading timber. They were aimed right at the platform, right where Russo was standing. I closed my eyes and pressed the button. CLK, 4,000 watts of halogen light exploded into life. Russo screamed, blinded by the sudden glare reflecting off the white snow. It was like staring into the sun. I broke cover. I didn't run away. I ran at the second man, who was rubbing his eyes dazzled. I swung the iron bar. It connected with his rifle, knocking it from his hands. I swung again, hitting him in the knee. He went down. Russo was firing blindly now, wild shots tearing through the station walls. I dove behind the truck. I yelled, "Now!" A massive roar filled the valley. The Aurora. David had engaged the throttle. The silver locomotive surged forward from the darkness of the overhang, its headlight blazing. It was bearing down on the hay rail truck. Russo froze. He stood on the track, squinting against the light of the oncoming train, his silhouette stark against the blinding snow. He raised his gun, But it was futile. It was man against machine. He dove off the platform into a snowbank just as the Aurora slammed into the rail truck. The sound was apocalyptic. Metal tearing metal. The truck was crushed, pushed along the tracks, sparks showering like fireworks. David hit the brakes. The train screeched to a halt, the wreckage of the truck wedged under its cowcatcher. Silence returned. I stood up, breathing hard, the iron bar heavy in my hand. I found Russo in the snow. He was trying to crawl away. His bad leg was twisted at an unnatural angle. He looked up at me, his face a mask of pain and defeat. "You froze," I said, standing over him. He spat blood. "Go to hell, Elias! I've been there," I said. "It's quiet. You'll hate it." I tied his hands with the ties from his own gear. I did the same to his partner. Then I walked back to the train. David was leaning out of the cab window, pale as a sheet. "Did we get them?" he asked. "We got them," I said. "And David?" "Yeah. Nice driving." I went back into the station booth. It was riddled with bullet holes, and the glass was shattered. The cold was rushing in. I picked up the phone. It was still working. I dialed the dispatch again. "Miller," I said when he answered. "Elias, I told you." "Shut up and listen, Miller. The Aurora is secured. I have 2 perpetrators in custody. One of them is Frank Russo. I have the hostage's location, Devil's Gulch Tunnel. And I have a bag full of hard drives that a lot of powerful people would kill for." There was a long silence on the line. "Send the choppers, Miller, storm or no storm. Or I'm calling the press." I hung up. I sat down in my chair, ignoring the cold wind blowing through the broken window. I poured myself a cup of coffee from the pot that had miraculously survived. I looked out at the Aurora, battered but standing. The ghost train wasn't a ghost anymore. It was just a train, and I wasn't just a broken signalman anymore. I took a sip of coffee. It was bitter, burnt, and absolutely perfect. The sun would be up in an hour. The silence of the pines would return. But for now, I enjoyed the sound of the wind, knowing that for once I hadn't let the silence win.